Bonjour, Wache Anin. Welcome to Lakehead University's Reconcili-action, Learning Truths and Enacting Responsibilities event. Ontario Native Women's Association, Indigenous Anti-Human Trafficking. We are happy that you are able to join us today. Denise Baxter, Indigenous, Makwadodum, Martinfels, and Donjaba. My name is Denise Baxter, Vice Provost, Indigenous Initiatives at Lakehead University, and I will be your MC for this event today. Lakehead University respectfully acknowledges that its campuses are located on the traditional lands of First Nation, signatory to the Robinson Spirit Treaty of 1850. And that's where I am located right now. And to the south, the Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi Nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy, and signatory to the Williams Treaty, is the location of our Orillia campus. In Lakehead's commitment to social justice and social responsibility, we advance the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action and Universities Canada principles on Indigenous education. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission recommendation to build capacity for, quote, intercultural understanding, empathy, and mutual respect has become a guiding principle for the commitments Lakehead has made in both Northwestern Ontario and Simcoe County, and will continue to guide our efforts in the future. Before we begin, I would like to share an important notice, a video recording of the Reconcili-action, Learning Truths and Enacting Responsibilities event, Ontario Native Women's Association, Indigenous Anti-Human Trafficking. Participants are reminded that this online event is being recorded. We are doing this to preserve a record of the event in the university's archives and to publicize and promote Lakehead University. By attending, you are agreeing to be included in the recording and its public dissemination and any media now known or later developed anywhere in the world in perpetuity. We will have opportunity to interact with our guests at the conclusion of their talk today. If you would like to type a question in the chat pod, you may do that. And you may also use the hands up option as well. I think we have a small enough group today that we can do that for you. So we'd like to thank you for joining us. It is now my pleasure to introduce our keynote speakers for today. Michelle Solomon is a member and elected councillor for Fort William First Nation. She is a proud mother and grandmother. Michelle earned a BA Indigenous Learning at Lakehead University and Social Service Worker Diploma at Confederation College. One of her many roles as councillor is to provide guidance and knowledge towards a substantial portfolio area for the First Nation, which includes health and community services, finance and administration, youth and social development. She was also a board representative with Dalico Anishinaabe Family Care. Michelle's main area of expertise is mental health and addictions, stemming from her many years as the employment and team leader and manager at Dalico Anishinaabe Family Care and health center manager for White Cedar. Michelle works as a community development manager at Ontario Native Women's Association, where she also volunteered and was part of the board of directors from 1988 to 1993. In her role as community development officer, Michelle leads programs focused on Indigenous women's leadership. Colin Graham, oh, I should have got a lesson from you. I want to say Ochi Chagwe, Babugo Inning First Nation, Ojibwe First Nation. He grew up in Thunder Bay, Ontario. Colin has been an advocate in community development for over 20 years. Mr. Graham currently works at the Ontario Native Women's Association as a community development manager. His past work includes working with the sexual health sector and in the mental health sector, as well as working with youth. Colin is a huge advocate for the youth and empowers the 2S LGBTQ community through experiential learning. Colin obtained his diploma through Confederation College and graduated in the Indigenous Wellness and Addictions Prevention Program. He completed the Life Skills Coaching, Human Relations, and Family Management Counseling Program in White Rock, British Columbia. Colin is passionate about deconstructing colonialism at different levels through community, as well as on an individual basis. It's important that we have conversation with ourselves and look at how we play a part in upholding structures of power. Quote from Colin. Colin is known for using his humor, as he believes it's a pillar of resiliency amongst Indigenous communities and to be used as a healing tool. I would like to welcome Michelle and Colin.
Regrets. You're muted, Colin.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like,
Try that again.
wow, sorry, short week, insane week. And, don't know what I'm doing. Thank you for that introduction, Denise.
Welcome. Sorry about the pronunciation.
Oh no, I love hearing other people try to pronounce it. What I have learned from that bio is a couple of things. I'm gonna get Michelle to start writing my bios. That was deadly. And proper name is Ochi Chagwe Babigonigan in it.
Ah, bewitched.
Super close.
I recognize the word Ochi, but after that. Anyway, I will pass it over to you both. Welcome.
I noticed that Jean had stepped into the room, so I wasn't sure if there was an opening prayer or not.
Jean is actually here to do the closing for the 2 weeks of our full,
Okay.
Yes, we had an opening the very first day that we opened, and Jean is here to do our closing for us.
Forgive my
Welcome.
assumption.
That's okay. Welcome, Elder Jean.
Thank you, Denise, for the introduction. I just want to say that it's really a pleasure to be here today and to have this opportunity to bring this information to the greater community, particularly to the university and those who are in contact with the university and have received the invitation to attend. So I'm Michelle Solomon, as I've been introduced. I'm also known as Oshki Mekina Ikwe. And I'm going to do the first part of this presentation, which focuses on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. So I am going to try and screen share here, which I'm not great at this, but I'm going to do my best. Okay. Can somebody let me know if you're seeing my presentation?
Yes, we can.
Oh, all right. So as the title says here, changing the narrative of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and that is the focus of our current work here at ONWA and the focus of this presentation. So starting with recognizing and honoring families of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Sorry, I'm just a little disoriented here with my stuff. So the Ontario Native Women's Association honors and acknowledges the lives of all missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and the voices and experiences of their families, friends, and loved ones. ONWA also acknowledges all the Indigenous women and Indigenous women's organizations whose tireless activism and advocacy over the decades brought much needed awareness to this crisis. Without these efforts, there likely would never have been a national inquiry into the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls at all. So acknowledging our ancestors of the past, present, and future. ONWA has been in existence now we're in our 50th year. In fact, in a couple of weeks, we'll be celebrating our 50th anniversary at our upcoming annual general meeting. And ONWA has always been led by strong Indigenous women who have worked on addressing issues that Indigenous women experience. And for those of you who don't know that much about us, we are a membership-based organization. So we have 21 councils, and councils are a group of grassroots women, a minimum of 5 women in community, and they gather together to address issues that are of importance to them, and they are members of ONWA to bring those issues forward. Pardon me. And we use our opportunities here at ONWA to further those issues. And then we have chapters. So our chapter organizations are actually incorporated organizations that are part of ONWA. And these organizations receive funding, and they do programming, both flow through funding programs with ONWA, and they also do other programming in their respective communities. So, you know, when we say led by strong Indigenous women who've worked on addressing issues, really it is a large group of Indigenous women. So that's 11 and 21 groups that come together regularly to address issues and do this work. And the work is focused on supporting women to take up their leadership roles in the family and in the community. And why we're focused on Indigenous women. So this is a poem that we use, or a quote by Art Solomon, which is so telling and so beautiful. Woman is the center of the wheel of life. She is the heartbeat of the people. She is not just in the home, but she is in the community. She is nation. One of our grandmothers. The woman is the foundation on which nations are built. She is the heart of her nation. If that heart is weak, the people are weak. If her heart is strong and her mind is clear, then the nation is strong and knows its purpose. The woman is the center of everything. So that is not the full poem by Art Solomon, but part of it, and really beautiful, and really demonstrates the importance of Indigenous women in our communities and in our organizations. So Onward's journey, as I said, we are 50 years old. And so this here is a list of really important work that ONWA has done over the years that has really brought us to where we are today. And I'm grateful to say that 1980, the Breaking Free, a proposal for change to Aboriginal family violence. So I was around at the time that, you know, this work was happening, and well, maybe not quite that early, but when they released their report. And that report was really pivotal to the work that ONWA would later do, and was really substantial in the development of in Beandigin and a couple of other women's shelters, 3 other women's shelters in Ontario. So that really kicked off, you know, the importance of this work. And then, of course, you know, it continued with the 2007 Summit to End Violence Against Aboriginal Women. 2008 through 15, a total of 5 summits focused on addressing violence. 2015, TRC Calls to Action number 41. The announcement of the inquiry. 2019, the final report into the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. 2020, so I will talk a little bit about this today. I think that this is probably a big focus of what I will talk about. And that is to discuss a report that was released by the Ontario Native Women's Association on October 4th, 2020, called Reconcili-action with Indigenous Women. This report can be found on our website. And so I certainly urge everybody, if you are interested in looking at this in more detail, and I recommend that you do, have a look at this report. And it is really the plan that ONWA has recommended and set out to address the National Action Plan. And then, of course, the Indigenous Women's Safety Table. And so what's needed in this work is capacity building at every level. So at the individual level, it's focused on safety, healing, and supportive services. At the organizational level, strategic planning, community engagement, performance, accreditation, strong governance at a policy decision-making level, and role modeling leadership. At the community level, engagement, rebuilding relationships, and working together. So those are important things that we believe are needed in the community. These are the recommendations that were made during the national inquiry. So there was 11 recommendations that ONWA did put forward and ONWA's closing submission to the national inquiry. And in addressing the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and creating solutions to address violence perpetrated against them, there needs to be a direct increase in responsibility and accountability at all levels of community agencies and government. It is time for leaders and policymakers to actively listen and empower the voices of Indigenous women and girls. As Indigenous women, we must take up our roles and responsibilities as leaders of communities. We must work collaboratively in order to develop effective solutions for change to occur. The inquiry commissioners need to be brave in carrying out their commitments to recommend actions that ensure the safety and security of Indigenous women and girls now and in the generations to come. So the MMIWG work at ONWA involves supporting families, traditional healing, cultural reconnection, creating safe spaces, bringing together families, and traditional healing. And I think it's important for me to just say in this work, most of the work that ONWA does in regards to missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls is not funded work. So during the time of the national inquiry, there was both provincial and federal funding that supported this work. And I speculate, because it aligned with the national inquiry that was happening at the time. But before that and now, a lot of the work, as I said, is unfunded, and it's work that program staff do in addition to their regular roles. So, for example, one of my coordinators of Indigenous women's leadership, she will support the work that I do in MMIWG, as well as her own role, her own job expectations, and that happens a lot with the work that we do in Indigenous women's organizations. So the impact on family members has been tremendous. Each family that receives support is always very grateful for any help they receive in honoring their loved ones. Families request to travel to events where their loved one was murdered or went missing in the hopes of finding something out or meeting someone who may know something. And so, when we talk about supporting families, that's kind of, the things that are happening with people when we do offer that support. It is common for many families that access support from this program to continue to seek answers in what happened to their family members. But that information is not always forthcoming. In fact, far too often it is not forthcoming. And what comes instead is the building of a support system, and that's what we offer here. And ONWA is honored to be able to support families to gather, and in doing so, they also find strength in each other's messages. So attending events for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls to begin or continue the healing journey while carrying on the memory of their loved ones. Many family members that attend the events do so as the voice of their missing or murdered loved one. Through culture and ceremony, these families are developing bonds with others who know the experience, not only to support each other, but also to walk hand in hand and work passionately to raise awareness and to never let this happen to future generations. Many family members don't have access to healing through culture ceremony, and many don't have a good understanding of tradition and culture, and that's something that we're able to offer here. So this is some of the work that we do here at ONWA to bring families and loved ones together as well. So on November 25th every year, the International Day to End Violence Against Women, that kicks off the 16 days of activism. So we have our poetry night event, and certainly that is upcoming on November 25th. And so I encourage you to attend virtually if you're able to. It will be an amazing event. It's always been an amazing event where people come together and share their spoken word and share song, poetry. And it's just really, even last year, I wasn't sure how it was going to be virtually, as I'm sure that was the experience last year for most things that were newly virtual. You think that you're going to lose the therapeutic benefit or the energy that comes with gathering in a healing way. And amazingly, people express still getting so much from gathering, despite the fact that it was over a computer. So Grandmother Earthdress, a lot of people do know about Grandmother Earthdress and how Grandmother Earthdress came to us. The Grandmother Earthdress is part of ONWA's bundle. She was brought here through vision and ceremony. The Grandmother Earthdress is a healing dress that family members have been able to connect with and continue their healing paths. The main purpose of the dress is to honor and acknowledge missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. The dress is also to serve as a sacred item of healing for families as well as communities to commemorate their loved ones. She is meant for families to visualize their loved ones in a beautiful traditional regalia. The dress has 365 jingles, representing that Indigenous women are confronted with violence every single day of the year on Turtle Island. The dress does travel, not just throughout the province. It has traveled throughout the province, but it has traveled to Australia, and it's really brought. I think it's been something that has brought a lot of healing to families. Grandmother Earthdress has its own bundle now, her own bundle. Colin may touch on Grandmother Earthdress a little bit more when he speaks, but he has played a significant role in the development and as a carrier of Grandmother Earthdress, and having that responsibility to care for her. So, if Colin would like to speak to that a little bit more, that would be great. The Mandela Rock Project, again, this is also something that Colin has had a significant role in. But the Mandela Rock painting exercise is an activity that uses art therapy to honor MMIWG2S. Each dot on the rock is to symbolize and honor positive memories or attributes of women that have been or are missing or murdered. The Mandela Rock Project encourages loved ones to then place the rock somewhere sacred or special to commemorate the memory of their loved one. I don't know if I could, I don't think I'm going to try and play this video because I might just really mess things up if I do. But this also speaks to Grandmother Earthdress. And okay, so I'll just quickly read this. One of the educational resources ONWA created during the initiative was the Grandmother Earthdress. 365 jingles sewn into Grandmother Earthdress that represent violence Indigenous women endure every day of the year. The Grandmother Earthdress is symbolic visual representation that represents awareness of the ongoing systemic and structural violence directed at Indigenous women. The idea was to create a red dress regalia in the form of a jingle dress, a sacred item of healing and honoring for families and communities to commemorate their loved ones. So the part that was missing in what I've said already is that normally the color red is not part of the journey ceremony. However, this specific dress was born out of vision and ceremony. Elders, healers, and knowledge keepers provided direction on how to feast and conduct ceremony. They also named the Grandmother Earthdress, which came from the southern direction. The Grandmother Earthdress honors mothers, daughters, aunts, sisters, grandmothers, nieces, and cousins in a good way. And I just chuckle because I think Colin does need to tell the story of when we went into ceremony for Grandmother Earthdress, and I was lucky enough to be part of that. And Colin, I mean, share your story. It's just too good to not share.
Okay, so thanks, Michelle. So the grandmother's dress is really actually dear and near to my heart, not only because I carried the dress, also because I was the one that actually had the vision to make the dress. So, which is why I'm the carrier now. And so what Michelle's referring to is when we actually unveiled the dress officially was on December 4th. I want to say it was 2017.
Yes.
It was when the inquiry first came to Thunder Bay looking for witnesses. And I remember we were asked to think about what we were going to do in anticipation of the commissioners coming here. And I ended up going to ceremony and having this vision to do this. And just before we had gone and actually participated, we were summoned. We were asked to come back to lodge, and I was told, lodge, you come back to lodge with the dress, where the dress was then going in a shaken tent, and then they just said lodge. I was then at this lovely little place out on the lake, and I met up with both Michelle Solomon, and I'm not sure if any of you know Cheryl Bagnall. And so we get out there, and I remember thinking to myself that, wow, after hours, these women are humble. There was not a stitch of makeup, not a curl, not a lash, nothing. And I was like, what's going on? Because I showed up to lodge wearing a fox fur coat. I had a Prada bag. Everything was all done up designer. No one had told me that it was a sweat lodge. And so when the elders asked us all to change for sweat lodge, I was very shocked. Luckily, I believe it was, who was it? It was one of the it was a Marsha sister, wasn't it?
Might have been.
Who gave me sarong. Yeah, it was Leanne Marshall who gave me a sarong. And I wore this damn sarong with little tassels up the one leg. I looked like I was straight out of Return to Blue Lagoon, just brown and chubbier. And next thing you know, I was in a sweat lodge in the middle of the winter. And so, I mean, I guess this is where it's very important to always remember to ask questions. But yeah, thanks for that. It's just a fun little tidbit story about the grandmother Earthdress.
Thanks, Colin.
No
I appreciate you sharing that, and you can get me for that later. But I appreciate you sharing that because I think that it was lighthearted. It was a lighthearted moment, and I think that's important to this work too. Okay, why is this not going to the next slide? Oh, here we go. Okay, so I'm going to move on to talking about ONWA's report, Reconciliation with Indigenous Women. As I said, this report was released on October 4th, 2020. And I'll just tell you a little bit about it. So there's 13 recommendations in this report, and the recommendations align with the 13 grandmother moons. And when we say grandmother moon, we do not simply mean mother to your mom or dad. It also refers to the true beauty of the turtle. A significant teaching of the turtle starts with the markings on its shell. The center has 13 large circles, which represents the 13 moons of the lunar calendar, and each moon carries a teaching. The outer circle has 28 smaller circles, and those represent the 28 days of each moon cycle. So this is a graphic of ONWA's 13 recommendations and the 28 systems that Indigenous women deal with every day. In the report, we offer 13 recommendations based on decades of input from Indigenous women and previous research. Incorporating the traditional 13 Grandmother Moon teachings, these strengths-based recommendations and the holistic approach will foster independence, resilience, and environments in which Indigenous women and girls are respected, not dehumanized, and their safety is upheld and supported. So these are the recommendations. And so one thing I will tell you about the report itself, if you have a look at it, I'm just going to go over the recommendations, but in the report, there's action items that align with each of these recommendations. So one, the safety of Indigenous women must be at the center of the National Action Plan of Indigenous Women. 2, restore Indigenous women's roles and responsibilities through the National Action Plan. 3, invest in Indigenous women and our organizations. 4, reclaim and restore the role of Indigenous women as mothers. 5, invest in healing. 6, restoration of Indigenous women's inherent rights. 7, restoring balance within communities. 8, addressing the many forms of violence that Indigenous women and girls face. 9, moving beyond the legal system to justice. 10, policy and research capacity, revealing the story and understanding of its meaning. Education, learning the truth. 12, culturally appropriate services and systems that Indigenous women navigate. And 13, accountability. So these recommendations are made, and as I said, there are action items that align with each of these recommendations, and they're intended to be a path to safety for Indigenous women. And the most important thing, I guess, that it speaks to is that Indigenous women, they have the solutions to making things better for themselves, and they have the knowledge to move this path forward. So as a result of the report, one of the things that has started since then is the Indigenous Women's Safety Table. So as you can see, the Indigenous Women's Safety Table is guided by the 4 following principles. The focus of the work for this table is on Indigenous women and girls. The application of an intersectional lens and Indigenous-based, gender-based analysis occurs at every step of the process. A focus on Indigenous women's safety and healing is maintained throughout. And the work is led and driven by Indigenous women and Indigenous women's organizations. So this was in response to the lack of representation of Indigenous women's specific organizations at the National Action Plan's development structure. ONWA worked to bring together a table comprised of Indigenous women with varying backgrounds of both professional and personal expertise in supporting Indigenous women. The table will work to ensure that ONWA's 13 recommendations from the Reconcili-action with Indigenous Women's report are incorporated into the National Action Plan. The table will also provide advice and guidance to the core working group to help ensure all of the recommendations in the final version of the National Action Plan related to Indigenous women's safety are implemented. This work is guided by the 4 following principles, which I've already talked about. And I think the other important things to mention as it relates to this report that are basically the foundation of this report is ONWA's theory of change and Indigenous gender-based analysis. And the information about those things are contained in the report. But there's also the She is Wise framework. And the She is Wise framework really speaks to Indigenous women's voice and Indigenous women's expertise in their own lives. So that pretty much concludes the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls portion of this presentation. I'm now going to turn it over to Colin to wow you with his amazing knowledge and expertise in anti-human trafficking. Miigwech.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. Colin, you're up.
Awesome. I'm so happy that Michelle is sharing her screen. She says that she's not great at it. I'm worse. So yay, she's gonna be flipping through. So yep, thank you. My name is Colin L. Graham, just like the cracker. I come from a land called Ochichagwe Babagonigan, also now known as Saskatchewan, which recently just changed. I do believe it changed to Saskatchewan because I am only one of 3 people that can actually pronounce it correctly, and I am now a threat to the chief's chair. So that being said, I now come from people of the river is what Nisatchwin translates to, which got me even more excited. And the reason why it got me more excited to say that I am from Nisatchwin, which also translates to people of the river, is because it is a line from my favorite song. My favorite song would be Proud Mary. So I want to come to the conclusion that I am Proud Mary. So thanks, Chief. All right, so as it was mentioned in my biography, I do use humor. I like humor. I've always used humor, and I will never shy away from gathering the strength up from my own internal bundle. That being said, when I do make a lighthearted joke, it is never at the expense of Indigenous women, especially Indigenous women that are survivors or have experience in exploitation. All right, as I get started, I think it's really important when we talk about our work, we always put out our acknowledgements, and the person I definitely need to acknowledge is my teacher, my friend, my mentor, is Mona Hardy. For those of you who don't know Mona Hardy, do your best to get out there and meet this woman. She is incredible. She is someone who speaks from the heart. She's very truthful, very honest. She is also a survivor herself, and speaks very candidly about the experiences. And the reason why I acknowledge her is because, give you some context, before I came to ONWA, I guess 4 years ago, I had worked in sexual health for nearly 15 years. And that's how I met Mona, actually, was out when I was doing street outreach. And so when I got recruited to do this work as a liaison, I remember asking, she was the first person I called, and I told her what I was working on and how this was a new project at the time. And I remember saying to her, I said, Mona, how do we fight the oldest living profession in the world? And she corrected me. And I love being corrected. I think that's when we're being corrected is our biggest learning curves, when we're making mistakes. So I'm always open to that. So Mona, she says to me, Colin, it's not the oldest living profession. She says it's the 3rd oldest living profession. She says the 2nd oldest profession is agriculture, and the 1st is motherhood. The 2nd, she centered everything in helping me recognize that motherhood was the oldest living profession. I knew that when we were doing this work and engaging with survivors, that everything had to be done in a way that was nurturing. So I'm always very appreciative of Mona Hardy. All right, next is what we're going to briefly talk about. You might hear me say the word victim. I very rarely do. I don't like the term or the word victim. I think that language can and has been weaponized, especially against Indigenous people, especially against Indigenous women. Sometimes if you do read my report, there might be the word victim, but that's only based off of the experience of a survivor when they're telling their story. For the most part, my work across the province, it was amazing doing the engagements because the women identified themselves as survivors. And which I'm very proud of, because I know it's not the same in other provinces. So the women themselves see themselves as survivors. So we make sure that we meet women where they are at, and we honor that. Okay, so don't really have the time to really get into talk about colonialism and violence, as I'm sure you all know. It's more than like a lunch and learn kind of conversation. But I definitely, what I will say to this slide is it's very important to recognize when it comes to the exploitation of Indigenous women in Turtle Island, we need to recognize that although it runs parallel with what other human trafficking looks like in the country, there are subtle differences, not subtle differences. The big differences are recognizing how colonialism, past and ongoing present day colonialism still play a role into how Indigenous women are exploited. I've got this thing that I've been saying recently is that so long as there is resource extraction, there will always be exploitation of Indigenous women or Indigenous brown bodies. That being said as well, I'd like to just recognize that when we're talking about colonialism, it's never to point the finger, place blame. It's to help us recognize that colonialism itself is a relational issue, and that if we're ever really going to make a path forward, we really need to start sitting within our discomfort to start having conversations about how colonialism has played a significant role into what paints Indigenous people, I guess, as the poster child of devastation. All right. That's the cliff notes of my very long. All right, so when it comes to this work around sex trafficking, well, trafficking, predominantly what we have been seeing, especially amongst Indigenous women, is we're seeing more as it's presenting as sex trafficking. I'm always happy to have these conversations, and I'm glad that you paired us both. You paired me with Michelle, because we talk about MMIW, and there's a reason why the two need to be talked about together. Anyway, but so contemporary sex trafficking, what it looks like currently right now is we're seeing four main areas. The first one being, oh, thank you, Chris. Oh, I worked with Chris long ago. So he's got a book reference there to check out. Okay, so familial-based trafficking, which is often driven by poverty. It can be intergenerational, most oftentimes is intergenerational because the violence or the trafficking itself has become normalized. Familial-based may include the exchange of food, shelter, money, and or sexual acts amongst family members. It's also very key and important for me to recognize, when it comes to trafficking, especially of Indigenous people, you don't see Indigenous people out there getting lured and groomed with Louis Vuittons or extravagant gifts. Oftentimes, because of the significant poverty, Indigenous women and girls are lured with food for their families, rent, those kinds of things. So it's not the telltale, I was lured by, this extravagant lifestyle. It's basically basic needs and survival. Then there's organized or gang facilitated trafficking, which often involves street level sex work, underground brothels, escort services, and exotic dancing. People are often taken back by the dancing piece, but it's a circuit, and traffickers will move women and girls through the circuit of gentlemen's clubs, if you will. Substance dependency driven trafficking, which often involves engaging in the sex trade in order to feed a chemical dependency that can usually often result in human trafficking relationships. So oftentimes when women are feeding their substance needs, they're more vulnerable and susceptible to meeting pimps, traffickers, and so forth. Again, the reason why they're actively seeking these substances is not because this is the life they chose, but oftentimes it's related to unresolved and unpacked trauma rooted deeply within colonialism. Economically driven. Trafficking associated with sex work is directed to serve oil and mining business developments or international events. So we are seeing more of these kinds of activities happening predominantly in the north, or where there is a lot of resource extraction. I'll give you a quick story. When I was actually writing my Journey to Safe Spaces report based off of all of our work, I was flown to Toronto with the other liaisons, And it was at a time when there was the international gathering of miners. And it kind of blew our minds because we were staying at this place called, I'm gonna date myself. It's called you all know Delta? Is it Delta Chelsea? But I don't think it's called the Delta Chelsea anymore. Or even, I don't think it was called that even when I went there, to be honest with you, but I just know what is that. Oh, Eaton Chelsea. Thanks, Denise. So we were staying at the Eaton Chelsea, and right across the street from the hotel, if you're familiar with Toronto, there's a place on Yonge Street called Zanzibar, which is a gentleman's club. And right on the marquee, it blew, you know, we came out to go to all collaborate and write this report together. And on the marquee, it said, "Welcome international miners, please." And it was a big invitation, you know, and I thought, wow. And it was almost at the same time we realized this, you know, we look around when we're in the lobby of the hotel, there was a lot of men hanging around in the lobbies, and you wouldn't think of it unless you know what to look for, but they were predominantly buying sex. It was happening right there in the hotel lobby. You would see people waiting, or also shopping online on their phones. And like I said, unless you know what to look for, you wouldn't have known it was actually happening. But then you stick a room full of six HT liaisons together, and we're pointing it out, and we're like, holy. All right, the situation. So currently right now, Indigenous women and girls, as well as some young men, form a disproportionate number of those that are sexually exploited here in Turtle Island through human trafficking. Oftentimes it's physical, emotional, and psychological violence, as well as a financial vulnerability that creates an environment of constant fear, as well as dependency. Violence against Indigenous women and girls contributes to the normalization of violence and teaches young women that this is acceptable, and it becomes normalized as incorporated in their everyday part of their lives. All right, so for there to be human trafficking, right? Like, trust me, when I first started doing this work, it was almost, it was difficult to get people to understand what trafficking was, because almost everyone had a human trafficking story at this point. In order for there to actually be human trafficking, there needs to be three things. And the three things that need to be there are the act, the means, and the purpose. All right, so for those of you who don't know, act is that recruitment, transportation, the transferring, and the harboring, or the receipt of people. You then need the means, which is the use of threats, force, coercion, abduction, fraud, deception, a definite abuse of power. I've seen that within the relationships. Vulnerability, giving payments or benefit or receiving benefits. Then you need the purpose. This is where things get. So purpose is the exploitation, including the prostitution of other people or human beings. Oftentimes sexual exploitation. We do see forced labor, but we tend to see the forced labor happening in Southern Ontario, especially within the farming communities. But it's not usually oftentimes with Indigenous people. It's more with people coming up from Mexico. There's slavery or similar practices. Removal of organs. Yeah, that does not happen in Canada. I want to be very clear. Removal of organs, there's no reported cases of removal of organs in Canada. When typically you'll see that in developing countries. When it comes to, however, there has been a shift in conversation because it's been coming back to me now through some survivors that they are being paid to carry or a child for someone. So it's not that that's an actual organ or anything, but it's a different way of how bodies are being used. And then I also have in there other types of exploitation. What I mean by other forms of exploitation, I'll give you a story. What we are definitely seeing, we've seen it more so happen in the Ottawa area with the Inuk. Not to say it's not happening here with our own Indigenous artists, but what we're seeing is traffickers or exploiters will lure, groom artists with shelter, oftentimes getting them addicted to like not just alcohol, but like serious substances. And what they do is they then confine them, isolate them, and get them to produce art, and the traffickers sell the art only, and then only providing the artist with the substances so that they can keep painting or carving. Grooming vulnerable populations for exploitation. So it usually happens in 4 steps. There's the initial meeting, gifts with invisible strings, the breaking of spirit of identity, and exploitation. Now, the thing about this is when we're talking about, this is across the board for anybody who's being trafficked in Canada. However, because of that unresolved piece, that historical piece of unaddressed colonialism and historical trauma, when traffickers and pimps are actually meeting Indigenous girls, and I do mean girls, they're already meeting Indigenous women and girls at level 3. We're already here at the breaking of identity and spirit because we have all this unresolved grief, unresolved trauma, and a lot of the time people haven't unpacked their own colonial ideology. So it's very easy to lure and groom Indigenous girls. And I always go back to saying girls because, so I'll give you another example. When we are out doing work, we're all familiar with what track is. I'm assuming it's really hard. I only see Michelle as a face, but I'm assuming you all know what track is. You don't know what track is. We've got a couple of neighborhoods, I guess, within, say, here locally, Thunder Bay. I can think of a couple places, right? There's definitely all of a sudden I forgot street names. You know, the place by Lot 66. What street is that? Court Street. Court Street's one example. But there's actually a couple of tracks in Thunder Bay. What you're actually seeing when you see women or girls working the street, that's typically only like 5% of what is actually going on within the city. And oftentimes when you see people working track or working on the street, not only is it 5%, but they're considered old. That's considered granny track. What's really happening is the stuff that you're not seeing is the stuff that's happening in trap houses, the stuff that's happening within Romeo type relationship pimping, is that there are girls as young as 13 and already being groomed and lured at 11. Another thing that's just to add another layer of disparity to that, I guess, is oftentimes as well, to the girls who are being groomed and lured at 11, it's like traffickers have this homing device, and oftentimes they have already been sexually assaulted or abused as younger children. Next slide. So I talk about this, okay, same kind of thing, but just done differently. Why I have this up is people, I'd always get asked, why don't they just leave? Why don't they just get out? Nothing is black and white. There's a lot of gray in the world that I work in. And the best way for me to describe it would be, like, again, I guess a visual based off of Maslow's theory of hierarchy of needs, which, by the way, he got from the Blackfoot. All right, human trafficking. So base layer, luring. So with luring, it's the recruitment process. Often begins with friendships, or like I talked about, Romeo pimping, or romancing a person. This is where the recruiter or trafficker creates a sense of belonging and often begins assessing boundaries and accessing information. Now, when I say boundaries, they're not just testing the boundaries of the individual that they've met, they're testing the boundaries of the people that are in their family or their support networks. They're gonna find out, if I got you home 5 minutes past your curfew, is anyone gonna look for you? They're gonna be getting connected and building relationships with your family. They're gonna know if there's, a food security issue in the house, or the light bill is on a limiter. They're gonna learn very quickly if there's any gaps or loopholes within your whole household and or support network. Next stage, grooming, known as the honeymoon phase. Often this is where there's an abundance of gifts. And like I said, that could be groceries for the whole family so that everyone loves this person. And attention, so the attention is given to the person that they're trafficking or about want to traffic. Oh, almost out of time. Thanks for that, Denise. Where am I at for time? 3 minutes. I got this. So they make them feel special. The coercion is where they send mixed messages, gaslighting. It's highs and lows, almost like a roller coaster. And once the trafficker realizes that that person will do anything to get back into the books of being in the honeymoon phase, like a light switch, like that, it's at the exploitation stage where the boundaries are broken down. They isolate the individual and they exploit them. 4-part plan in Ontario. There's a four-part action plan. One of those pillars in the action plan is the Indigenous led initiatives fund, which is how I am able to do my work. Next slide. I can talk about yeah, thanks. Next one. No, I'll keep going. So basically what my program does in that 4-part Indigenous led plan is we are about building agency, community, and survivor capacity. We work with the existence of frontline services and workers that address complex needs of survivors, and we support Indigenous specific prevention and awareness. We also do 2 campaigns throughout the year to ensure that we're constantly talking about human trafficking. Case in point, one of my campaigns, the blue jingle earring. All right, next slide. For more information, I really want you to visit our website at www.onwa.ca. Under reports, you can access the Journey Safe Spaces. You can also go to our learning page where this is available for download. What I love about this particular report is it's a foundational document that is all survivor focused, survivor led. It's not trauma voice stories in it, other than like a couple of quotes that really drive points home. In here came 14 recommendations, which are now being implemented in a 5-year strategic work plan across the province with all my liaisons. It's a pathway to new collaborative and integrated working relationships in Ontario. It definitely lays out exactly what the needs are and how we can meet them by making spaces safer. There's also a framework in there about making spaces safer as well, and which is the next slide. Beautiful. Everything that we do, we make sure that it's survivor-centered, prevention through education. We have access to safe and respectful spaces, core supports, evidence-based. Everything we do is always backed up with research, and streamlined supports. Real quick in a nutshell. Any questions? Comments? I actually do a 6-day training human trafficking, and I did it in 30, very cliff notes in 30 minutes, but I do have a 6-day that I do for the ministry.
Oh, thank you so much. I was thinking the same thing. I'm thinking we need to have you both back to have a lengthier opportunity to actually dig into some of what you gave us a really highlighting closed notes version of. I believe the work that you do is critically important, and I know you both have spent many years working in this area. And so what we got was a little sprinkle of pixie dust, as it were, just enough to get us wondering more. And I did have a peek at the website. I know ONWA's very prolific at publishing documents, research, and certainly at hosting events for people across the province in terms of providing supports. I do get a chance to participate in the She Is Wise conference, and that's always 3 days of listening to amazing people talk about the work that they're doing, but also a chance to interact with people from across the province who are coming together working in similar regions. So we are at our 1 o'clock stage, so I do have to wrap up, unfortunately. But I would love to extend, as I said, the invitation for you both to come back and on your own, perhaps, so that we can spend, peeling back that next layer of diving a bit deeper into some of the work that you do. I would encourage people to visit the ONWA website. There is a lot of good information there. And also there's a lot of work that ONWA does across the province that you can join in person in whatever region that you are, because they do have offices throughout the province of Ontario. We are fortunate in Thunder Bay, we have an office here, but also in Aurelia, we have a chapter there as well. So the two communities that our university is located in is there. And I also, thank you for sharing that story, Colin, about your first time to the Sweat Lodge with this particular group of people, because a lot of people get nervous about, oh, I don't know if I should go. If they've invited me, I might make a mistake. And I think your humor in a nice way to do it is people are kind, right? So if you don't have it all, you don't know all the protocols the first time you go in, or even the second or third time, there's always people there that are willing to help you work through that and walk through that, so that you feel safe and you feel secure, and you're there to for the reason that you're there for, and you're able to participate in a good way. So I do appreciate you sharing that. I think we all have a story like that of some sort, where we've gone to our first ceremony and not totally understood, exactly what was happening as it was unfolding. But that is a way of learning. And we are, a kind group of people that bring people in and help you learn when you're at that readiness stage in your life. So on behalf of Lakehead University, I would just like to appreciate you both and say Chimigwech for you coming. And we do have Elder Jean Nawagizik here, so I'm going to invite Elder Jean to bring us to a close of our 2 weeks of enacting truth and reconciliation, and thinking about our responsibilities and the actions we can take as humans who live in this particular territory and across Turtle Island, so that we can come together and we can think about those words, Colin, you spoke about, those decolonizing spaces, and what does it mean to address trauma, and how do we walk behind and beside people to ensure that they feel the support and they have the support that they want. So Elder Jean, I just have to find you to spotlight you. One second here. I don't see him.
He's highlighted.
Oh, he is highlighted now? Okay, wonderful. Thank you. So I'd like to invite Elder Jean to the circle, Miigwech, and thank you so much for joining us today. Elder Jean is coming to us from a little bit north of Thunder Bay, Kiaski, Saging, and Anishinabek, also known as Gull Bay, for those people who know that name. So Elder Jean, we'll turn it over to you.
Chimigwech, thank you. Good job there. The speakers, Michelle. Good job there, lady. And yeah, the other person there, I don't know. So anyways, Colin. Yeah, that's a huge area, when we talk about our First Nations women and the challenges that they face and the abuse and the violence, right? And all my life, as a person and growing up in a barrack land, my role, I didn't know, just recently that my role in the community was to protect, women, children, and elders. But in the dark periods of my life, that not knowing, subconsciously, that's what I was doing. I witnessed a lot of violence in my home. My mother's you know, always getting beaten up. And my mother used to always tell me, says, someday you're gonna grow up and you're not gonna, you're gonna stop all this. She used to tell me as a kid, and I did, after I got a little older and I told my mom, says, nobody was gonna hit you or abuse you again. I says, as long as I lived. And she just passed away on me there a couple of months ago, reached over 90 years old. And the thing she had to go through as a single mother, So I know she did a lot of hard work. So knowing that, what our rules are as men in the community, we have to, stop that. One of the things I continue to see in my community is guys loading up on booze and inviting women to a party. You know exactly what that means. It should be stopped. It should be, and the police don't do anything because there's no, it's not against the law. They say, people all drunk up. So as far as the heavy duty issues that I was listening to, Ottawa did a workshop a while back similar to that, human trafficking. I used to think when I was a kid growing up, I thought that was in the movies, and then I started seeing in our back doors and in our neighborhoods that happening. It's not a movie anymore, it's reality. So, and I know there's a lot of discussion and some actions along the line, but I think we need to do more. So with that, I'm going to say a prayer, and I'm sure there was lots of discussion on truth and reconciliation, and then everybody's affected by it. And I'm just going to do a prayer for everybody's safety. The issues nowadays about culture teachings and that cultural safety, and so people are aware of that. Sometimes you go to sweat lodge ceremony or something, and then there's no way of identifying perpetrators, using spirituality to continue that abuse. I always speak against that. You don't know when people are asking for help, maybe that's their last stop, their chance of hope, to better their life. And then we end up destroying that, we destroy the person, That's the thing that we need to be aware of, when we're doing cultural stuff. We don't need to do that. So with that, Chigmi for allowing me to be part of this ending, in the Anishinaabe language, we say go bin, we don't say goodbye. See you again. And I always like it when we say that, because I always see you guys back somewhere playing a different role in your communities. So I know it's been a journey for all of us doing great things, right? So I want to pray, Ojibwe, with the guidance of this eagle feather, so everybody's be safe and have a good weekend. I'm doing sweats all weekend, so anybody nearby wants to grab a sweat, night happenings tomorrow night and Sunday. You don't have to wear a mask. We'll put our faith in our higher power, I guess. That's not transmit any COVID. I believe in that, by the way. That's my way of life. So, Jimmy, let's show Miss Nakas. Say my Paul and get more luck. Jimmy, let's go home. Shabak, the young. He was in the man where at Chinchigadic, Binojik, when Mago, and a key, you know, again, what Bamatsu no, who in it, that you say, you know, and I'm doing this, what, and I'm doing more than you just saw, show us. And he the virus, mission, okay, Chinanaman, or we do cause that in where Nanad, Nanadamaka, you do come on where. What coming is in, with no mad seeing, doing what on. We don't know. Kajen among where Capital Daga, what Mishnavik, we don't know. And go be what and the key in Asia Museo in Shomus. Jimmy Rich, and I'm going to sing a song for you guys so you can travel home safely. If you're traveling, if you're talking from your home, maybe you're traveling in your house. You might trip and slip, so keep it safe for the end of today anyway. To you guys. Just use a part of Alex Keith's traveling song. I don't know the full amount of it. I'm learning it, and I think it's a beautiful song. Jimmy Glitch, people, thank you.
Jamie Gwetch, thank you so much. And as Elder Jean says, we will see you again. Agigawabamen, everybody. Have a safe and healthy weekend.
Miigwech, Jean.